The Schwinn Homegrown just arrived today, well yesterday, in an old Trek box. So we're going to open it up and see what it looks like, right? Put your tongue away, you crazy boy. Well, it started to rain, so I moved inside, but I did put the Homegrown together out of the box. Gotta say, it really works pretty well for a 20-year-old bike that's obviously seen a fair share of use and abuse. Just thought I'd walk through a little bit of these Homegrowns real quick. I don't know how well you can see it. This paint is really in pretty good shape considering, but you can see these kind of green sparkles. They called this bass boat green, and Schwinn made a couple kind of bass boat colors. I think there was a black bass boat gold, bass boat blue, depending on the year and the model. They didn't always do the bass boat colors in the Homegrowns, but if you ask me, that's really a hallmark of the homegrown bikes in the 90s. Yeah, putting it together was really easy. Of course, this was a bike that had already been assembled and ridden for many, many years, but putting it together out of a FedEx box really is a reminder of how much easier bicycles were to work on through the 90s and things when they were maybe just a little bit more traditional. A couple things, these are just cable cantilever V-brakes. Very good brakes. These are Shimano LX that may have come on the bike. They look old enough. They look period correct. These were great brakes and they still work pretty well. They've got some newer Cool Stop brand pads on there that work pretty good. They stopped the bike. I pedaled this thing around the block. In itself is a pretty neat thing. They slow the bike down, they stop, they don't squeak, they feel fairly solid. The wheels on these Diori hubs spin pretty good. I'm going to take those apart and see what the bearings look like. They can't be too bad. They sure spin well. There's no play in them. Dioris, I mean, they still probably make essentially these exact same hubs and put them on bikes. Matter of fact, these may be newer. I'm not sure. But they seem to work really well. One thing that doesn't work well is the headset. I'm trying to spin this as freely as possible, and it just grinds and binds in there. That may be that they tightened it down for shipping, so I'm going to take this headset apart, look at the bearings in there. This is probably an open bearing system, so we may have to replace those ball bearings or even replace the headset, which is a pretty easy thing to do. Thought I'd grab a little look here. Talked about the headset being very rough. I don't know how well you can see in there, but this headset is full of rust and corrosion. I wanted to get a little bit of look at how this headset's set up, because as I take it apart, it's going to be kind of hard to do and things might go flying all over. But the headset, it had several spacers on it, but there's a cap here that just slides off. And then there's a compression ring. You might be able to see a little split there that needs to come up and off until this whole thing will kind of slide off. There's a bearing in there. And when all this comes off, the fork should slide out the bottom, and then we can look at there's another set of bearings down here. But yeah, this headset is going to probably need new bearings at an absolute minimum. It may be so pitted out in there that we need to put a new headset on here, which would be fun because then we could put a cool new headset in. But yeah, this is what it looks like before we get into it, and it's not good. I did get this headset apart. It was extremely rusty in there, and I've tried to clean that out with some degreaser. It is a little pitted. I think we're going to replace this headset just with something serviceable like this one was, but maybe with a sealed cartridge bearing. I'll show you how the headset looks later. The actual bearings is pretty hilarious. But I wanted to grab a look at the cable routing, so I took the rear shift cable out and took that out of the front shifter. That was routed kind of along the top tube here on this kind of closest drive side. That went through these couple of cable ties, zip ties. I don't know why that was done like that, because the brazons are right here, and looked to be working just fine. But also, the brake cable went on the other side, and it took that out. But wanted to grab a look at the front derailleur routing. So this is a kind of a top pull, bottom swing, I think you call this. So it pulls from the top. Some other cables are routed underneath and pull from the bottom. But it kind of swings from the bottom too, as opposed to having like a higher up kind of pulley system, I guess. So when we put this back together, we'll just route the cable through this housing just like it is now, and then straight down through this clamp with the right amount of tension. So that's how we'll do it. Few other things. This crankset works real well. The front derailleur will shift. It shifts real smooth, but it needs some adjustment. It rubs in a lot of the gears, and doesn't seem to shift down into that lowest gear very easily. You can see this Shimano LX crankset. It's really nice. I always thought these were so great. It's old, and it's the other side, the non-drive side crank arm. This LX piece is rubbed off pretty much entirely, but pretty good shape. The bike did come with some kind of generic pedals. I put some just platforms that I had laying around. Now these look a little beefy for this old bike, but kind of got us pedaling around anyway. This Diori derailleur I don't think is doing too well. It'll shift a few gears and then just kind of slips. So I don't know if that's how it's set up, or if it needs to be adjusted. It definitely needs to be adjusted at a minimum, but maybe replaced. It's too bad. I mean, Diori derailleur is just fine. It's a good little rear mech. Again, these V brakes, they work really well. They could maybe use a little adjustment. I just tightened the cable down and started riding it, so they're probably out of adjustment anyway. But you can kind of see there's some rust on these bolts, and then, corrosion, and they're just old. So I don't know if it's going to make sense to try and clean these up or replace them or what. One thing I noticed, if you can kind of see through here, a lot of these late 90s frames did have a little old school Hayes 22 millimeter disc brake mount. It'd usually be right in here somewhere. This bike doesn't have it, so it's going to be V brakes only. And I don't know how easy it is to find V brakes anymore. It's been a long time. Disc brakes are really taking over. But so we'll see what the best way is, and really just kind of see what the best path forward is for this bike. Hopefully we can get it into a bicycle that's good for riding around, maybe even seeing some single track for fun, but at a minimum cruising, and maybe modernize it just a little bit. It might be that a lot of these parts are in such good shape that we can just clean them up and ride the bike as is. So we're going to have to just see, and maybe it'll turn out that it's too expensive or too labor intensive to give this thing too much love, and maybe the frame will just go up on the wall or something. I'm sure it's pretty, this Bass Boat Green. One thing I was surprised in, the fork, this is an old RockShox Judy long travel. It says on here somewhere. I don't know how much long travel was in the 90s. This should be a coil fork. It says dual adjust, so I'm guessing that's compression and rebound adjustment. This thing actually moves pretty smooth. I was expecting it to just be junk and for oil to leak out of it. I only rode it for about 500 feet, but I cycled the fork through the travel, and I'm, as usual, a little heavy for the fork in its stock setting, but it really moves smooth. I don't know what to do about it. I could try taking it apart and looking at it, but I don't know a lot about these old forks. Maybe I'll just ride it, but then I'm afraid it's unsafe, so I'll have to do some research and see. At a minimum, we're going to probably just take all the parts off this bike, clean everything up, see if anything jumps out as broken or problematic, see if we can't get some touch-up paint for the frame here. I'm not sure what we're going to be looking at for that. And this sparkly Bass Boat Green, I don't know. But we're going to just kind of spend a while seeing how much life we can breathe back into this thing. It's a kind of a little piece of history, fun bike, real pretty bike. So it's going to be fun.